Hi everyone, welcome back. In this lecture, we'll see how to use ChatGPT to generate the source code for unit test cases for controller layer. So we implement the REST APIs in a controller layer and we'll see how we can use ChatGPT to generate the unit test cases for REST APIs. And again, if you start writing the unit test cases for the REST APIs, it takes a lot of time, isn't it? And if you know already how to write the unit test cases for the REST APIs, and again, if you have a requirement to write the unit test cases for the REST APIs, then you can take the help from ChatGPT to generate the code. So in this lecture, I'm going to show you how you can use ChatGPT effectively to generate the code for unit test cases for the controller layer. And here I have created this prompt template. This is the generic template that we can use to ask ChatGPT to generate the code for unit test cases for the controller layer. Now let us quickly go through this prompt and then later we'll use this prompt to generate the code. Act as a senior Java developer or a testing expert. So here we are assigning a role to the ChatGPT. We are telling ChatGPT act as a senior Java developer and testing expert and then create the code for unit test cases as per our requirement. I want to generate unit tests for a controller layer of Spring Boot project using Java, JUnit, Spring Boot test and Mockito. So here we are mentioning Spring Boot version 3.5, but you can use any Spring Boot version that you want. For example, Spring Boot 3, Spring Boot 3.5, Spring Boot 4, and then here Java version 21, but you can use any Java version that you want. For example, Java 8, Java 11, Java 17, Java 21, Java 25, and here JUnit framework, Spring Boot test, and Mockito. So we are telling ChatGPT use these frameworks, technologies, and libraries to write the unit test cases for controller layer. Next, here is our project setup and accordingly generate the code for unit test cases. So our project has an entity. We can give any entity name, for example, employee, product, student, order, etc. If you are working in your project and if you have an entity, that entity name you can mention over here so that ChatGPT can generate the unit test cases for that entity. For example, let us say we use student. Next, the fields of entity name are, in our case, student is the entity, and then we can mention the fields like ID, first name, last name, email, and then controller, student controller. It depends on service class, student service, and then controller exposes the standard CRUD REST endpoints under this URL. Next, these are the CRUD REST endpoints, and we want ChatGPT to generate the unit test cases for these CRUD endpoints. And look at here, this is the URL and this is the REST endpoint name. Next, this is our test requirement. We are telling ChatGPT to use JUnit 5 Mockito. Next, use WebMVC test annotation to load this particular controller. In our example, employee controller. Well, let us say in your Spring Boot project you have multiple controllers, and if you want to test a particular controller, that controller name you can pass to this annotation. Next, use mock_MVC class to perform HTTP request and validate the responses. Next, use Mockito bin annotation to mock the dependencies. Don't use the deprecated annotation. Use this Mockito bin latest annotation. So here I have explicitly mentioned this because sometimes ChatGPT gives you the legacy code or the deprecated code. That's why I have mentioned the standard instructions over here. And we are telling ChatGPT to use this object mapper for JSON serialization and deserialization. Next, test each endpoint. Again, we are mentioning the instruction to validate the correct HTTP status codes, validate request response payload structure and content, include failure scenarios like 404 when ID not found, ensure service methods are mocked and verified wherever necessary. So these are the important instructions we are telling ChatGPT to follow. Next, these are our expectations. We are telling ChatGPT to use these annotations as needed and use this method call to simulate the HTTP request and use this method and assertions to validate the response and validate the JSON using this JSON path library method and then content type JSON method and create a mock data using add before annotation with a setup method and then use Mockito provided when then return and then through methods and then include this and except to check the status of the HTTP response. So we are highlighting these methods because these are the methods we use in a real-time projects. That's why we're telling ChatGPT to use these standard methods and APIs. Next, this bonus section is optional. Here we can give ChatGPT like follow, arrange, assert, structure, or given, when, then, and write the test methods for each use case like happy path and edge cases. Include meaningful test method names. So these are the optional because ChatGPT follows the standards, so we can use these as optional. It is good to mention these instructions as well. Okay, so this is the prompt that follows the industry standard best practices, and we can use this prompt to ask ChatGPT to generate the code for unit test cases for the REST APIs. Okay, perfect. Now what we're going to do is we're going to use this prompt. We'll replace the placeholders and then we'll use this prompt in the ChatGPT and we'll see how ChatGPT generates the code. Let us copy this prompt and go to the IntelliJ IDEA and go to the file and just paste this prompt over here, and let us quickly replace the placeholders and then we'll use this prompt in the ChatGPT. So here we have entity name as a placeholder. You can give any entity name that you want. For example, if you are working on the project e-commerce, you can give the entity name product or order or payment or inventory. Let us say we are working on the employee management project. We can give entity name as employee over here, and then here entity name employee, and here we can give the fields like ID, first name, last name, email, and then department, and then age, and then date of birth. Well, you can give any number of fields that you want. To keep it simple, I have given these fields over here. Next, the controller class is employee controller, and then it depends on the service class. Employee service IMPL, which implements employee service interface. It exposes standard CRUD REST endpoints under this URL /API/entity name plural. So here we have entity employee and this should be plural, that is employees. Next, copy this and here let us replace this placeholders with employees. All right, next here also we have placeholder entity name, so let us give employee. So we can use find and replace option to quickly replace the placeholders. Perfect. Now we have replaced all the placeholders. Next, let us copy this prompt and let us execute this prompt in the ChatGPT. So let me copy this prompt and go to the free version of ChatGPT over here. So this is the free version of ChatGPT. Click on new chat, paste the prompt, submit the prompt, and wait for the response. And notice here, thinking longer for better answer. So ChatGPT 5 basically uses the thinking model to think about the request, and as per the request it generates the response. And you can see the instructions in the response over here. Below is a complete ready to drop in JUnit 5 test class for a controllers layer using Spring Boot, Java, JUnit Mockito, MockMUC, Jackson Object Mapper, and whatever the instructions we mentioned in the prompt that ChatGPT followed. Next, let us quickly go through the code now. You can see employee controller test. So this is the typical naming convention that we follow to write the class name. So we are writing the unit test cases for employee controller. That's why this is the class name, employee controller, followed by the suffix test. And again, you can see this class is annotated with @webMUC test annotation. And here we have passed the employee controller class name. It means this annotation basically loads only this controller. Next, auto configure mockMUC annotation. This annotation is related to mockMUC and it will automatically configure this mockMUC object. And here The mock MVC object is injected using @author annotation. Object mapper is injected using @author annotation. Next, Mockito bin annotation is used to mock this employee service object and store in the application context. And again, we told ChatGPT to not use the deprecated annotation. So this is the latest annotation that ChatGPT has added. Next, here is a setup method that will execute before each JUnit test case. Next, this is the JUnit test case to test create employee REST API. And this is a display name annotation that displays this name in a console. And you can see when, then return. So these are the methods. These are the Mockito related methods that we use to stub the method calls. And then mockmvc.perform. This perform method internally calls the static post method to make the post request for this URL. And then content type application/JSON. And the response is basically in a JSON format, so that handled by this object mapper class. And then this is the and expect method that basically tests the response of the REST API like status, header, content, and then JSON object details like ID, first name, email. And then here verify method is used to verify the method calls. Next, this is the JUnit test case to test get all employees REST API. This is the JUnit test case to test get employee by ID REST API. In this case, it returns the success response, that is 200 status code. This is the JUnit test case to test get employee by ID REST API. In this case, the REST API basically returns resource not found exception. Next, this is the JUnit test case to test update employee REST API. This is the JUnit test case to test update employee REST API with not found status code. This is the JUnit test case to test delete employee REST API. This is the JUnit test case to test delete employee REST API with not found status code. Next, here's the employee class. ChatGPT added instruction like replace or remove if you already have this model in your project class path. So we typically have the entity in our project, so you can remove this Pojo class from here and you can use it from your project. Next, you can see the notes and tips. If your real employee class is in your main code, then delete the inner employee static class, this one, and use the employee class from your project. Okay, so you can go ahead and read all these notes and tips and you can follow accordingly. So this is how we use free version of ChatGPT to generate the code for unit test cases for the REST APIs. Next, let us use the paid version of ChatGPT to generate the code for unit test cases for the REST APIs. So here, let me copy the prompt and let me go to the paid version of ChatGPT over here. And here in a new chat, just enter the prompt and submit the prompt, and let us wait for the response. You can see the steps over here, thinking longer for better answer. So ChatGPT internally uses different models to perform different operations, and you can see clarifying unit test setup, creating test endpoints and instructions. If you want, you can skip from here, handling exceptions in a controller test, setting up controller test. Well, you can use either free version of ChatGPT or paid version of ChatGPT. Both gives you the code. Okay. So most of the people rely on the paid version because paid version is quite faster and provides the accurate and more information in the response. You can see the response over here. So ChatGPT paid version basically add the more instruction about the response. Next, scroll down and here you can see employee controller test class. It is annotated with MVC test annotation, auto configure mock MVC annotation, and import annotation. So this import annotation is extra added over here. So ChatGPT paid version basically assumed that we are telling it to use the global exception handler as well. But we haven't mentioned this global exception handler in the prompt. But even though we haven't mentioned it, the paid version assumed that we are using global exception handler in our project. If you have a global exception handler class in your project, then you can import that global exception handler over here. ChatGPT temporarily added this global exception handler class code at the bottom over here. You can see global exception handler class code, and it is added a comment like if your app already has a global exception handler, you can import that instead. Okay, so ChatGPT basically assumes that we are using global exception handler in our project, and we are telling it to generate the code for unit test that handle the exception scenarios. This is awesome, right? Even though we haven't mentioned in the prompt, but ChatGPT is assuming that we need to use the global exception handler for handling the exception scenarios. Next, you can see all the unit test cases for all the REST endpoints. Alright, so this is how we can ask ChatGPT to generate the code for unit test cases for the controller layer. And this is the standard prompt that follows the industry standard best practices. So you can use this prompt to generate the code for unit test cases for the REST APIs. Okay, so whenever you have a requirement in your project to generate the code for unit test cases for the controller layer, then you can use this prompt. Don't write the code manually, line by line. It takes a lot of time and lot of efforts. You can use the ChatGPT and generate the code, use it in your project, and you can save your time and speed up your work. Okay, great. I will see you in the next video.